pretty sure we lose everything, but it doesn't seem to have properly connected to YouTube. I don't know why. Fuck. Okay, now I got something. But it doesn't seem to have properly connected. All right. Okay, folks, so you'll have to bear with us. Apparently, it took about 6.5 minutes for YouTube to properly connect to us. So, welcome to a special episode of, I guess it's not really an episode of the Mike Sennello Show. So, you'll have to just bear with me again. I've got some audio coming through. Okay, so today's topic, as you know, is immigration. And on with us to debate that topic of immigration is Karl Emmerich. So, everyone, welcome to our debate. Karl, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Mike. No, so basically, I'm a progressive leftist. I usually use the term progressive. I'm on YouTube. If you guys want to check out my channel, it's just my name, Karl Emmerich. And I'm really looking forward to this debate.
All right, cool. So the question that we are looking to answer with this debate is, should we allow more immigrants in? Karl, I understand that you take the pro side of this position. And since that's the positive claim, and the burden of proof, of course, is on the positive claim, I'll let you go ahead and make it, and let's dig into that. And hopefully there's something that we can disagree on here.
So basically, the de facto logic I have behind this is that I think that it should essentially be as easy as possible for someone to immigrate here. And so that just kind of de facto means that would increase immigration, because we know that there are more people trying to come in than we currently allow. And so that's kind of the root of why I fall into this side of the question. I mean, if for some reason people didn't want to come here, I obviously don't support like forcibly making people come here. But at the end of the day, I think it should be as easy as possible for people to immigrate here, to attain citizenship, and become productive members of this economy.
Okay, so let's see if we can't take that to its logical end. It sounds like you're making an analytic a prioristic argument for immigration, but I'm not sure if that's a practical argument or if that's an argument from the a prioristic position. So let's suss this out. So would that be a policy that would be something along the lines of like a completely border-free policy? Is that something where you would say immigration? Let's start with this. Is immigration a moral neutral? Is it a moral good? Is it a moral negative?
I would say immigration is a moral good, moral negative. I mean, I think that's a bit of a nuanced question, but I think that I err on the side of freedom, and I think that individuals should have the freedom to travel to this country and to become members of this society. And so I would say it is a moral positive, I suppose.
Okay, so the question we have here is, should we allow more immigrants in? So the number of immigrants that we have coming in now, are you okay with that, or would you like to see more?
I would like to see that number increase, just because I believe that we should let in people who are trying to come here. And so I think that just based on the evidence that we have, that number would increase. The number of immigrants that we allow would go up if we allowed everyone who is trying to come here to come.
I mean, do you have a number in mind?
No, do you have a number in mind?
No, I don't. Okay. So is there a cap to that statement? If we take it to its logical end, should anyone be allowed to come in with no provisions?
I think about it a little bit like within the United States. I mean, we don't have any sort of provisions on, how many people can move into California. I think of it a little bit as the same, where I think that while it's theoretical that everybody in the United States could move to the state of California, could just be overwhelmed and there would be no one in the rest of the country. I think that that's unrealistic and not really super relevant to talk about. And I think of it a little bit the same as the United States. I think that people that are moving here, for the most part, are moving here out of some state of necessity. And I don't think that making it easier to come here, by definition, would mean that everybody that could come here would come here.
Okay, so are you prescribing then a border policy equivalent to the state border policies? For example, I live in Connecticut. For me to cross the New York state line, there's absolutely nothing stopping me from doing that.
No, of course. I don't think it should be as free as the state to state, because I think that obviously people should essentially be able to come to our borders, receive the necessary documentation if they're looking for residency, if they're looking for, I think that the process of citizenship obviously wouldn't just be attained right at the border. But basically, I think that there should be some sort of checkpoint, but it shouldn't be anything that stops people.
Okay, so as
more
far
as
as
just to measure things.
Okay, so you're aware that the overwhelming majority, well, not the overwhelming, but certainly the majority of illegal immigrants in this country get here legally.
Oh yeah, they're overstayed visas.
Yeah, the majority are overstayed visas.
Yeah.
So I guess if we're going to have a literal border discussion, it would probably be easier to have that discussion with Canada, because I don't think that there's that association of the type of person that necessarily comes across the border with Canada. So I think from a more neutral and nuanced perspective, if we're going to use a border as a hypothetical, probably Canada would probably be better than Mexico, because I think we both agree that most of the people who get here, who are illegally here, are here because they've overstayed a visa, meaning they got here legally.
Yes,
Would you
I
be?
mean that's just a fact. Yeah, of course we agree on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds to me more like you're suggesting that there is. It sounds like you don't want a completely a complete dissolution of the border itself. That you believe that the nation state is a worthwhile endeavor.
If I was talking about my utopian society, maybe I, envision a world without nation states. But for the practicality of what we're talking about in our lifetimes, yes, I'm not in favor of like abolishing the nation state anytime soon.
Okay. So how so it sounds like you're not in favor of necessarily increasing the number of people who come across the border. It sounds like you're more making an argument for a type of person who comes across the border. Have I read that correctly?
Well, no, I think just because my claim is, I mean, I don't have the specific numbers of me at hand, but I'm sure that I am fairly confident if we looked it up, there are more people that are applying for visas than there are people currently attaining visas, and there are more people trying to come here than are currently able to come here. Would you agree with that?
Well, of course there is.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's a necessary truth. So if there exists a thing and there are people looking to obtain the thing, generally speaking, there are going to be more people trying to obtain the thing than there is the thing. This is the rule of scarcity.
I mean, essentially, but I guess I'm advocating for eliminating that scarcity, because I think that if you want to be able to come here, you should be able to come here. Obviously, there would be some natural scarcity that exists because if someone doesn't have the means to travel here, for example, if they can't afford a plane ticket or whatever, just if I don't have the means.
Well, I mean, as far as the issuance of visas, there are only so many visas to issue.
That's what I'm saying. We should increase the number of visas that we issue.
So
if someone is.
So about the visa, so this sounds much more like a practical argument than a necessarily. It sounds like you're making the practical argument rather than. Oh God. There's three tiers of argument. There's the optics argument, there's the practical argument, and then there's the principled argument. So it sounds like you're arguing on practice rather than in principle. Is that correct?
On practicality, but also out of principle, I do think that it is. I don't believe that I have any special right to live here just because I was born here. I don't think that I deserve to live here more than someone who was born in another country. I think that that's true for everybody. I don't think that you should. Oh yeah.
All right, because should we allow more immigrants in? The answer to that question to you sounds more like there are other questions we should answer first, and then the end result of me answering those questions will probably wind up resulting in increased immigration. Have I read that correctly?
That's a very fair summation of my argument, yes.
Okay, so then let's get more down to nitty gritty, because my take, and you've presented the positive argument, and I think we sussed out where your position is in pretty fine detail, because I wanted to do that first before I started debating you, because I don't like debating straw men. You're here now. I can debate you. I can debate your positions. There's no point.
I appreciate that. I think you have very fairly represented my argument.
Okay. So do interrupt me anytime you think that I'm not fairly representing any argument that you're making. So
same to you.
I don't think that the government should have any. So this question is not really an answer for government. It is not really a question government should be really answering. Should we allow more immigrants in? To me, the question is, who are we allowing into our borders? And I don't know, given the border policy, if that would result in more or less immigrants. And I kind of don't care if that would result in necessarily more or less immigrants. I look at immigration as a moral neutral, which means that its morality is conditional. That means that if Osama bin Laden wanted to, if he was still alive, if we could roll back the tape to the Obama era and Osama bin Laden could somehow make his way into the United States, I would not want him to come across our borders under any circumstance. So in that case, his immigration...
Wait, so you wouldn't want him to come so that he could be arrested and stand trial and hopefully...
Okay. So if it was basically just a trap, then setting that trap might be something to consider. I don't think from the rules of military engagement it would be a wise idea to have any avenue for him to sneak in here. I think you would kind of agree with me on that one, that you wouldn't want to create you would prefer not to create an avenue for somebody like Osama bin Laden, whose sole existence is the literal destruction of every human being in our country.
Yeah, I think Osama bin Laden is obviously a special situation and far from the norm. But yes, I think that if we had any understanding of where Osama bin Laden was, I think that the right steps would be to, I mean, capture him, I suppose, you know?
We'll do the best you can to capture him, and quite
Yeah.
frankly, if that meant that you had to kill him instead of capturing him, so be it.
Yeah, I'm not really thinking about where he's immigrating at this point. You know what I mean? I think that we are in somewhat of an agreement on Osama bin Laden.
Yeah. Well, that's like I gave the most preposterous example so that there could be some line to be drawn. And if you had responded with, "Yeah, no, Osama bin Laden, I don't care if he comes across the country," then clearly there is a deeper conversation we have to have about immigration from a principled perspective. So the way I would see the discussion about the necessarily allowing immigrants in based on a certain condition would be in the case. Let's say we had an arsonist running through town, right? Obviously, the fire department needs to put out those fires, but the real root of the problem is that the police need to go and arrest the arsonist. So, to me, the border policies, the policy that would be prescribed for ICE, that sounds to me like the fire department putting out these fires. So something like the wall would be a fire department putting out the fires, when the real root of the issue is if there are nefarious actors looking to usurp the United States, we should get rid of those things that allow them to usurp the United States. So I think this is where we're going to kind of disagree. I don't think that the solution to, I think there is a real problem with immigration, and that is the type of people that come across our border, which require a certain vetting process. So I think that's the problem to me, is there's a certain type of person that I think is easier to just disallow from coming across our borders than to have to deal with once they get here. Osama
Now,
bin
so
Laden being an example of
could
that.
you elaborate on that? Because kind of the framework that I'm thinking of when you say something like that is that if we have the knowledge that this person is a murderer, has done something terrible, my first instinct isn't, okay, let's keep them out so that they could potentially go harm someone else in another country. My first instinct is, if we have some sort of provable way to know that this person is a murderer, well, then the right action is for that person to be given over to the proper authorities, whether it's in the country that they're coming from or in our country, frankly, and for them to be held to justice. I don't really understand the point of keeping someone out that we think is going to cause harm. That seems almost counterproductive and would cause more harm.
Oh, no. So in the case of something like Osama bin Laden, I feel like it would be a lot easier for him to conduct the harm that he's looking to conduct from within our borders and from without it.
I'm saying that if we have a way to measure whether or not someone coming in is a murderer or a terrorist like Osama bin Laden, if we know that that's him, then we should just capture him.
Well, okay. So in the case of Osama bin Laden, he was. Can we agree that he murdered people in the United States?
Oh, 100%.
Okay, so he murdered people in the United States. There's a very different thing between Osama bin Laden murdering people in the United States and us arresting him at the border and trying him for those crimes that he's committed within our borders, and Osama bin Laden blowing up people in Afghanistan. Because that seems to me like the crime he has committed is against the state of Afghanistan, is against the people of Afghanistan. So if they want to apply for extradition, we would grant that extra right of extradition, and he would be tried in his state. This is where I think we might have to make a distinction about our positions on the rights of the nation state, because I don't think that it's right for us to try someone who committed a crime in another country who is not a U.S. citizen, who has no bearing on the United States. I think the appropriate thing to do is, if you are looking to come into the United States, clearly you would rather be in the United States than wherever you are. So I think the due punishment is, yeah, if there's an extradition request and you stop him at the border, you would extradite him to Afghanistan, where he'd be tried by the Afghani government. Otherwise, you just say, good luck, get out of here. And if that happens at the Canadian border, and the Canadians say, whoa, Osama bin Laden's in our country, yeah, no, he can go. You can go back to Afghanistan. That I think is the more preferable policy than to actually bring him into our borders.
Right, to say, if for whatever reason, I can't imagine this would happen, but that the Afghanistan government would not want Osama bin Laden. They wouldn't want him. Like, if we had him captured, that they wouldn't want him. I don't see a scenario where they wouldn't want him, and we would just be, all right, I guess we'll just drop you out. Like, what country are we sending him to at that point?
Oh, well, then in that case, there's a lot of North African states where that would be the case, where there are terrorists in the North African states where they would come to the United States, and those North African states would be like, yeah, no, go ahead. Good luck. We don't want him.
No, but then that's the point where we hold them here.
So okay. So here's what I'm saying. Let's say if we have somebody from Somalia. Somalia is a really serious. We have a serious problem with immigration from Somalia when it comes to terrorism, because there's a lot of these Wahhabi terrorists
I'm
who
interested. What do you have like some numbers that you're pointing to when you say that we have a real problem with terrorists coming
I'm
from some?
getting there. I'm getting there.
Okay.
With the Wahhabi terrorists, and the problem with the Wahhabi terrorists is that there's no way to vet them. So it's not that there's necessarily a certain number of them that are coming through. It's just there's absolutely no possible way to vet them when it comes to a place like Somalia. And this is true
Well,
of.
I'm sure you and me are
It's
in
not. It's
agreement
not
on this. Where
nearly
it's
as true
innocent
of the
until
rest
proven
of the Middle
guilty, is it
East as it
not?
is in a place like Somalia.
I'm sure you and me are in agreement on the principle it's innocent until proven guilty. No,
Oh no, no. So this
you don't
is
believe in that?
well, they are innocent until proven guilty. True, but I think that when it comes to somebody coming across the borders, if there's no way to conduct that vetting process, then
Then we should
in
assume
our
they're innocent.
current state, then we should not allow. So
Seems like a contradiction then.
what are you talking about?
Well, if you say that you believe in the principle innocent until proven guilty, it seems weird to assume that they're guilty.
That doesn't matter.
Well, it does matter.
The nation state is a nation state. It is a private club, if you will. We don't have to allow anyone in.
No,
So,
but I'm saying that you're saying that we shouldn't allow them in on the basis that they might commit a crime. I'm saying, do we know that they've committed a crime? Anyone might commit a crime.
well, in that case, if yeah, I mean, unless you want to take the Voschian preposterous perspective of there's no way to know anything, because knowing,
Then no, I wouldn't go that far. But
yeah. So no, then I don't stand by that. So there are a lot of reasons. Let's say you have like the Boy Scouts of America, right? They don't want to allow pedophiles into their group. Well, is it innocent until proven guilty? Are we going by the legal standard, or are we going by a preponderance of the evidence, or are we going by we have a sneaking suspicion we're better off just not allowing our kids near this dude?
well, now I think that it's a big difference between the government and a private entity like the Boy Scouts of America deciding what they want to do. I think that the government holds a standard of innocent until proven guilty, and I think we both agree that that's something that's a good thing.
Right, in a court of law. So there's a lot of cases where in a civil court, that's not the case. In a civil, well, innocent until
Well, yeah,
proven
in a civil
guilty.
court, it's just whoever is
There's a
more.
preponderance of the evidence. So that's barely a standard of innocent until proven guilty. So in this case, we're not taking the case that we can prove that you are the thing. In this case, there's no way to prove one way or the other. And yes, I agree that from a legal standard, they would be innocent until proven guilty. However, again, there is a vetting process for people coming into the country. And since this is basically we agree that the borders of the nation state are just, right, are necessarily just, which means that we don't disagree that a nation state should exist. For example, it doesn't mean that this nation state should exist, but that the notion of a nation state shouldn't exist.
I have no problem with the notion of in our current society, yes, nation states existing.
Yes.
But that still doesn't really get at the heart of what I'm saying. So why are you saying that we shouldn't allow people from Somalia?
Oh, I didn't say we shouldn't necessarily allow them from Somalia. I'm saying that the rationale for not letting them in is that there's no way to conduct a vetting process. There's no way to vet those people.
And that's what I'm saying. Like from the standpoint is that we should assume then that they're innocent. Because if if it's some sort of civil offense,
that seems like a really that seems like a risk that I don't think that most people would be willing to take. Now, and that's because it's dependent on our current environment. So if there was, for example, if we were living in a country where there's a serious problem with people like usurping the system, coming to the United States to get basically anchored in with a baby, I think that if we figured out what was going on inside our borders first, then a lot of these problems would necessarily go away. And I think that's true of what you're saying right now. So if we had a system within the United States where we didn't have any handouts for people to take advantage of who are coming into the country, then you wouldn't have to worry about people taking advantage of handouts as they come across the country. They're either going to.
What handouts are you necessarily worried about? I mean, for example, for someone to receive welfare benefits, I mean, they have to be working. So, I mean, someone's coming and they're working and they're just simply not making enough to survive. I mean, what exactly?
That's not true. You don't have to be working to receive welfare.
Well, what welfare benefits specifically are you referring to?
Well, when we're talking about actual welfare, when we're talking about just simple, here's a check, here you go. There are plenty of counties in this country that have that.
Could you like specify, or could you like give me an example or something like that?
Chatham County in Georgia.
County
I
in
worked
Georgia?
with the folks that did that. I actually had to apply for these sort of things. I knew people who had these sort of things. There is just you don't make enough money, so here's some money grant.
They don't make enough money, which that they have some sort of income coming in, correct?
Yeah, it's just welfare. It's you don't have enough money coming in, so here you go. Here's more money. And no, you do not have to be working or employed to do that, to get that. The same thing is true of food stamps in Georgia. You don't have to be working to get that. There's a lot of things that are considered that are subtle handouts. For example, it's fairly easy to get your kid enrolled into certain public schooling systems without actually having any legal status in that town. And doctoring those documents is actually incredibly easy. So that's a freebie. I mean, when it comes to healthcare, I mean, there is a freebie that's given out to anyone who comes here, because emergency rooms, for example, they have to treat somebody to a certain extent, of course, regardless of their ability to pay, and they don't ask any questions. They're not allowed to ask questions until they've reached that certain standard. So it seems
like the moral reason that we do that is because if someone needs help, that they should get their help. And I don't see that as a reason to exclude certain people because they might be injured and need to go to an emergency room.
Oh, okay. So let's say you're pregnant. All right. Okay. If you go to the emergency room, they have to handle that pregnancy. They have to handle the birth.
Yes, I think they're not allowed to ask questions. Very good thing.
Okay. So because of the way the 14th Amendment has been read, and I think it's been read incorrectly in this respect, if you live in Canada and you come to the United States and you come here for an hour to have the baby and go home. Now that baby's a citizen and they're afforded certain rights in this country. They get that service for free. And on top of that, because they're a citizen in this country, there are certain rights that are afforded to, there are certain privileges that are afforded to their parents. I won't get into specifics on that, but that to me seems like the problem isn't then coming across the border. That to me seems like that there's this thing that they're taking advantage of, that if they weren't able to take advantage of it, then they either wouldn't come across the border or they would pay that bill anyways.
I think that taking advantage of is the wrong phrasing. I mean, the child is taking advantage of it. The parents are. In what regard do you think? Like what is taking advantage of? I mean, these are things that everyone, like for society to prosper, people must have children. We must have children. I think that we should. I frankly don't think that it's right that someone would have to pay to have a child.
Okay, now we're getting quite off topic.
All right, well we can keep going. But
do you agree that situation exists? That there are people that come here to it's called an anchor baby to have a baby on the U.S. dime. What?
I said I doubt that's the technical term, but sure. I'm familiar with the scenario that you're describing.
Right. So if that wasn't a possible scenario, then I wouldn't care about that person coming across the border. And that's my take on immigration generally. Is that I would rather fix things here.
And have children. Well, I'm trying to get. I want to settle in on the Somalia example because you brought up Somalia. Okay. You said it's because we can't vet them, and so I said innocent until proven guilty. But you haven't told me yet why we should assume guilty, or at least assume that they shouldn't be allowed in.
Because it's a risk evaluation. We do that with everything we do.
It's a risk evaluation. But could you elaborate then? Where is this assumed risk? I mean, where like is there data that you're pointing to that you think that
I don't have to be more? I don't have to because this isn't an argument I'm necessarily making. I'm explaining to you.
Well, wait a second.
Okay, so if you agree that there is a certain country for which there is a significant risk of, for example, I was trying to come up with something that's not a terrorist. Let's say that there's a country with which we're at war, right? And there's a certain risk that if we allow somebody in, that they're going to be a nefarious actor towards that war. That there is a real cost of human life that we're risking by allowing somebody to come into that country. If we had a way of vetting that, then no big deal. Who cares? We can determine which side of the war you're actually on. In you come, you're a good guy. Or you're a bad guy. You know what? It's just easy. It's not. It's easier for you to just go away than it is to deal with trying somebody who is a simple, a militiaman within a war, right? There's rules of engagement with war that I kind of agree with. Trying, people who have been basically forced into war, drafted into war, that seems to me kind of who are not in positions of authority in that respect, kind of immoral. Okay, so in the case of something like Somalia, you have a certain risk of this nefarious actor coming in. The risk is a percentage. And then the causal outcome is the thing you multiply that percentage by. So in the case of somebody, if the government, let's say, says, hey, we have kind of no risk, that percentage with Canada is basically zero, right? then we don't. Then that evaluation, that risk evaluation, it's a moot point. Well, it's not really a moot point. We've done the risk calculation. The same thing is true of a place like Somalia. If you have that percentage and that number is much higher, then
Based on what though is that number much higher?
well, whatever metrics you would come up with to determine that.
Well, I mean, you're the one that brought up Somalia. I'm saying, what are you pointing to say that Somalia is more dangerous?
Oh, because that's where we have a much larger degree of Wahhabism. Saudi Arabia is another place where we have a serious problem with that being a huge source of terrorist immigrants. As you know, the 9/11 terrorists were almost entirely from Saudi Arabia. So there's a handful of countries where you might consider there to be an outsized risk of that sort of thing happening. Very few of these people who are so. And I'll give you an example. All right, if we're gonna have to do this, something like the percent of Wahhabists would be a serious consideration to take into effect, because these are people that at a very fundamental level seek out the destruction of the United States in very literal terms.
At what
And
point do you think we
and
bear a
I'll
certain-
grant you this is a very, very small proportion of the Muslim world. Very, very small percentage. They are an
That's right.
isolated and super rare case. I'll grant
Okay,
that.
I'm glad we're in agreement on that. Awesome. At what point do you think that we bear a certain amount of obligation for a country like Somalia that we have dropped the bombs on? We have created refugees from that country. At what point do we bear an obligation to, when there are people that are trying to flee the violence that exists in that country? Now, I'm not saying that we're the sole reason that the violence in that country exists. At what point, though, do we bear some semblance of responsibility for that?
That's a little bit different from a strict immigrant. We're now talking about somebody who is seeking asylum.
Well, it's
So-
I would say that's effectively a form of immigration.
So I think your argument for that would be better if it was Mexico, because the nearest country to Mexico is the United States or
We didn't
Guatemala
drop
or
any bombs on
Belize.
Mexico. We could talk about the countries that we've destabilized via coup. We could talk about like those countries like Honduras.
Oh yeah, and there. Let's talk about Honduras. Yes, we.
So at what point do
you know
we
what would be
bear-
better? You know what would be better, because we're gonna try. Let's try to bring this as close physically to home as we possibly can. Guatemala. The Guatemala Civil War was almost entirely a result of our actions in Guatemala, and I'm 100% in agreement that we should have never been there in the first place. And the Guatemalan genocide, the Mayan genocide that happened in Guatemala in the middle 90s, which is a huge source of illegal immigration here in the United States, was enormously on us. Should we bear a certain degree of responsibility for that? I think that there might be a reason for the UN to say, you guys caused the destabilization of that state. Your UN dues are going to go way through the roof. And, there might be other nations that say, listen, let's say like Germany. Germany says, listen, what you guys did in Guatemala was atrocious. And unless you start, giving them money, basically, tariffs, embargoes, whatever, trade agreements. I'm perfectly willing to accept those terms. As far as the seeking of asylum, if your nation will not protect you, if your own government is looking to kill you, which is what happened in Guatemala, then what you should do is seek the assistance of the immediate nearest government that is capable of providing that. Now, I'll also grant that if Mexico is also killing its own citizens, and Belize and what's the one south of is that Nicaragua? Is also
Nicaragua was right in the area, yeah.
yeah, is also, so if there's no other direction for them to go except to the United States, then there might be some affording of asylum to be sought there. So as far as asylum is considered from our own atrocities, should we be held accountable by those governments? Yes. Should we be held accountable by
I'm saying at what point do you hold yourself accountable to an extent? And now, obviously, not you directly, but it is us as the taxpayers that funded these. I mean, it's not just Guatemala. I mean, essentially every country in Latin America, we have supported indirectly or directly a coup in that country. We have also backed military dictatorships in almost every Latin American country. That's caused a tremendous amount of destabilization, poverty, and terrible things in the region. At what point do we bear some sort of responsibility personally? Now, I'm not saying other countries sanctioning us, the UN, raising our dues or whatever. I'm talking about us personally. What point do we say, hey, these people are trying to come here. We've caused a tremendous amount of damage to this country where, frankly, we could be arguably one of the reasons that they're living in poverty and why they're trying to leave
huge
the
part of it.
situation we're in. We're a huge part of it. At what point do we say, well, then we should allow them to immigrate here?
Well, that's a very specific solution that I disagree with. So I think there's other solutions you could move towards. And I'll give you an example of
Why do
one.
you disagree with that solution, though?
Oh, well, can you give me an example of a different solution that I think you might
I
agree with?
imagine that I would probably agree with your solution, but yeah, go for it.
Okay, so there's monetary damages to that country.
Mhm.
Okay, so we don't have to necessarily sit before a court and have the court order us pay those damages. We don't have to. We could pay those damages. So there's a, so
yeah,
there's so if they said, listen, you screwed up our country, we need money to get our country back to where it was, then I won't agree to a necessary dollar amount. Like if they just said $1 quintillion, I'd say, come on, there's no way we caused $1 quintillion worth of damage there, right? We're not giving you more money than has ever existed in damages, but yeah, I would be perfectly in agreement with the notion that if we did damage, then they are due damages.
Oh, I think that, yeah, no, it seems, I mean,
And
just
it seems to
from
me,
what I've
hold
seen
on,
from your
Carl, real
content,
quick. If we did that, and if we got them to a point with that, where, and let's say they didn't have a corrupt government. And by the way, I've worked with tons of Guatemalans. This is why I know about this. And this is, they've told me about their trek across Mexico to get here. And it's where I learned the word corruption. Yeah, and that's actually why a lot of them actually like Trump, I guess, because they think that he's been doing a lot with the Guatemalan government. I don't know anything much about it. This is what they tell me.
Yeah.
But they, yeah, if the damages were such that it created an economic situation where nobody was fleeing that country, then problem solved. They'd rather be in that country than the U.S.
I mean, that's a solution that I think that if we could somehow repair the damage that has been done in Latin America to the point where nobody is fleeing these disaster situations, I think that that'd be fantastic. But that's not what's happening. And we know that as of right now, there are people who are trying to come here. And if there was a solution on the table where people are saying like, hey, we can, somehow repair this, that doesn't seem to be something that anybody's talking about. I'm glad that you and me are talking about it. Hopefully maybe more people start to.
And this is my point of contention with you, I think. Is that I don't think the solution is at the border. I think the solution is within our borders.
But why should they not be able to come here when they're coming from Latin America? Like, why, what, on what basis should they be excluded?
Well, okay, so I'm not making an argument that we should exclude people from Latin America. I'm saying that their asylum, that in that particular case, that asylum claim would have to go through a certain level of, I think that asylum claim would not be a legitimate asylum claim if there wasn't a country much geographically near them to provide that protection from their own government.
See, I wasn't even specifically referring to asylum claims. I'm talking about immigrant here because I know that it is
economic immigration.
Economic immigration, sure. And
okay.
So I'm saying though, but why? At what point? Why would you exclude them? And this, this is
from economic immigration. From economic immigration.
People we know that there are people who are trying to come. There's people are talking about what was the term that people were using, like caravan or whatever. People were talking about that for a while. On what basis do you not think that whatever number you think it is, what are you saying? Why shouldn't they be allowed to come here?
So I'm not going to say that they should or shouldn't. Here's what I'm going to say. If you are worried about nefarious actors, then we should fix the things within our borders that would allow them to be nefarious actors. So if we're worried about criminality, then we got to fix the things within our country that would allow them to be criminals. Do you see what I'm saying? Like if there are, for example, things that allow them, if it's easier for them, weed is a very easy one to fix that I think you and I would agree on. If they are coming to the United States, let's say like they move to New Mexico. New Mexico, weed is still treated pretty badly. It's still treated pretty harshly in New Mexico. So let's say they're coming across the Mexican border, they get into New Mexico, and what they do is they engage in the sale of marijuana for money. This is a black market commodity, which means that that's going to, of course, come with necessarily going to come with violence. But because it's a black market commodity, there's kind of a markup on the product, right? So if it were suddenly made legal, then that black market would no longer exist. Do you see what I'm saying? Like you would rather have.
I agree, and we're in agreement. But I'm having trouble seeing why that means that we shouldn't currently allow them to enter this country.
Oh, well.
I'm having trouble seeing the connection.
Maybe you're not understanding that I'm not necessarily actually even making that argument.
Okay.
So if you are looking at people who are nefarious actors, let's say that they come to the border and you are able to determine that they are nefarious actors. It's just easier to say, no, we're not taking you in. It's a lot easier
but if we're able to determine that they're nefarious, like, with the example that, I brought up, why would we send them where we think that they might go do other terrible things? Don't you think there's almost a moral obligation where if you know that someone is a nefarious actor, that you should hold them to stand some sort of trial? Even if
no. Okay, so let's take somebody like when I say nefarious actor, I don't mean necessarily violent criminal, because there are plenty of people, and I've worked with them, who I'm calling them nefarious actors in the sense I lived in the hood in Savannah, Georgia for a while, and I mean the hood, where you went to bed to the sound of gunfire, and it exposed me to a very different way of thinking, where the idea was how much can you, where in a lot of cases they were overtly looking to bilk the system. So what I mean by that is just straight up lying on a food stamps application about what they have and what they might need, straight up lying on WIC, doing things like I actually dated a social worker down there, and she was the give charity to moms rather than take babies from moms type of social worker.
Okay.
And one of the things that she introduced me to is just this train of thought that just like blew my mind. And the train of thought was, and she introduced me to these clients, I need more WIC, so I'm going to have another baby. And to me, that's like, what are you doing? Like, no, the WIC doesn't cover the cost of that. Like, no amount of government subsidization is going to make that better, right? Like, you don't go and have a baby to get more WIC. If you could determine at the border that person was at least meaningfully likely to do that, to me, it would make more sense to just say, whoa, get your stuff in order first, and then come across.
So a couple things. So because I'm sure you're against the welfare state as it currently exists in the U.S. I also have problems with it, but probably different problems.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious. Do you have any have you ever seen any data? You don't have to produce it right now or anything. But I'm asking, do you have any data that actually supports that that's a large number of people, the people that are purposefully choosing to have babies to collect more in WIC or to collect more in other welfare benefits? Like outside of that, anecdotal example, I'm not, I'm sure that's something that really happened to you. And have you ever seen any data that supports that? Have you ever seen anything that supports that there is a large number of people making that calculation?
What would you consider large? Are we talking about a raw number, a percentage?
I'm interested if you've seen any data on that calculation being made at all by people.
I have seen it. I don't remember what it is. I'm not going to try to recite something I don't actually have memorized for sure. But that's kind of not the point that I'm making.
Well, I think that it is. I think that there is any system that you can imagine, there are going to be people that take advantage of it. I think that if you had an entirely free market capitalist system, there are going to be people that try to take advantage of it. I think that is true for.
They're going to try to. They're going to try to. I think it's a lot less subject to success in that order.
I would definitely strongly disagree with that. But we can have a free market capitalism debate another time.
Okay, so you know what? I think we're going to actually come to a head very soon here, because I think that I could envision a world in the United States where we could return our immigration policy at the border to what it was in 1900. Do you agree that you could envision that world?
I'm not familiar on the time frame exactly, but I do know that there was a period in U.S. history where we had essentially open borders. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, I mean, there was a period in U.S. history where we had full-on open borders for all intents and purposes.
That's not what you're referring to.
That was much, much, much earlier. I mean, that
obviously
we're talking about is like late 18th century. Yeah. So
what was the standard at that time?
In the which time? The late 18th century, or the 1900?
The 1900, the one that you brought up.
Oh, okay. So in that circumstance, basically what we had a shit ton of, excuse my language. I'm trying to not get the boot from YouTube. In 1900, for all intents and purposes, our immigration policy was: are you coming here? Are you bringing something with you that is going to kill people? So at the ports of entry, what they screened for was things like smallpox, and I'm assuming you would be perfectly okay with screening for smallpox in 1900. I
think that's probably a good practice.
Right. And that's a person where it's easier to just say, get back on the boat. Like, I don't care where you go, but you can't come here. Like, the bar's closed. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Right. And I think that's a perfectly legitimate way to treat something like that. There was extremely minimal screening for criminality, which I think is fine if you have a country where you have a justice system that is not nearly as clogged as it is today, where you're do a fair and speedy trial, right? Where those speedy trial, you go to trial right away, right? And where, if you
just out of curiosity, is one of the ways that you support kind of cleaning up that process is ending the drug war? Is that something that we're in agreement on, or no?
Probably.
Okay. Yeah, maybe not specifics, but broadly.
There are things that we might disagree on.
Yeah.
Why marijuana is Schedule 1 blows my mind when heroin and coke are Schedule 2. I don't get it. I don't
No,
get it.
that
I'm
yeah,
not going
that's
to say that it's good. I'm not going to say that go out there and smoke weed, nothing's going to happen to you. No, it will make you stupid, and it will
uh,
kill. It will, and like my brother's dealing with this right now. It will lower your sperm count. So if you're trying to get pregnant, you should put down the pipe for a while, right? And there are other
very
reasons why.
interested to see the study. I'd be very interested to see the study that supports
Oh,
that.
that's actually well known. And it's not
Okay, no,
permanent. It's not permanent. It's just like if you're a regular user of weed, of marijuana, of THC, of any of those products, then and you're trying to get somebody pregnant, you should put down the pipe for a while, right?
interesting,
Yeah,
interesting.
it,
I'll
it
have to
does.
give
It
that a Google.
100% does lower sperm counts. Now, I'm fully aware of the fact that the long-term health consequences of smoking weed are not what they are for like virtually any other vice that's actually legal. But at the same time, I want to make it clear that I'm not saying that it's completely harmless and it's all fun and games. But there's no reason it should be, I think, illegal at all. I think it should be, like Larry Sharp says, regulated like onions, right?
No, yeah.
Yeah. And there's other drugs that I would put into that category too, like mushrooms. To me, psilocybin. There's no way to overdose on it. There's genuinely no way to overdose on it. I don't know if you've ever
Right.
seen somebody who's had too many mushrooms, but they puke them up.
No, yeah, no. I definitely have
Yeah.
experience with people that have
Yeah, you
had
puke it up.
those. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so no, I agree with you that like a huge percentage of I mean, even when it comes to the penal system, like our prisons are way overcrowded as it is. If for the most part, there are prisons that aren't overcrowded, but for the most part, they're way overcrowded. You alleviate some of those problems. You alleviate the problems with sending people to a huge percentage of those problems of sending people to prison. So, and I think that's something where if you had the United States from a policy standpoint, look from an economic policy standpoint, let's limit ourselves to that, to what it looked like in 1900. Very limited regulation, extremely low taxation.
See, that's where I feel like we find a ton of disagreements, and I'd be happy. I know we're running low on time, so I'd be happy to have that debate with you though on the economic side of things because I think that would be really interesting and engaging.
Right. So I think my prescription for policy would actually result in lower immigration, but the type of people that would be coming to the country would have the decision to make, which is either you're going to be really hard workers or you're just going to starve.
So
And
wait, out of curiosity, then, how many people do you think are coming here because they think that they can mooch off the welfare state? How many people do you think that exists?
I honestly couldn't tell you that. I don't think that question has even really been asked from an empirical standpoint. I do
Well, I feel
know
like
that
there's a number of people who make that claim, and so I was curious, as someone who I feel like to a degree is kind of making that claim, where there are people that you're worried
I
about
don't,
coming
and
back.
here's the thing: I won't even make the claim that there's even a meaningful percentage who would do like what's happening in Savannah, where it would be overt and it would be explicit and it would be deliberate. But there
But
is
you're
a
just saying
serious
the existence that those people might exist, period, is a reason to have
to search for
strict.
those things, to control for those things. Yes,
And
yes, obviously.
advocate searching for those things?
Well, I mean, you'd have to go do certain background checks that may or may not be possible with certain people. I mean, there are some assumptions you're going to have to make that anyone is going to have to make when you don't have any proof, when you don't have a standard. So, like a preponderance of the evidence standard to me would be something where we're fairly sure that that boy that you're bringing with you is not your kid, right? And we're fairly sure that you're just using this kid to get across our borders, right? You're just trying to make a sympathy plea to get across our borders. So maybe what we should do is try to find out who the kid's parents actually are first and see what's going on.
See, I feel like that's getting into, obviously you're feeling like the child separation that happens at the border. I'm sure that that's what you're referencing.
Well,
Obviously,
I
I'm
don't know
very
about that. I mean, obviously, if if you're trying the parents for a certain criminal behavior, then obviously you have to separate the kids. There's
See,
no
but
way.
the problem because right now crossing the border illegally is considered a criminal offense, isn't it? And so that by definition, all of those people are. Is that
Okay. So
am I incorrect on that?
kind of. So the separation that's primarily happening is when they've come across the border, and what they've found is that they are doing something while they've crossed the border that is also illegal. So, for example, if the parents are mules, you know what a mule is, right?
Yes, I don't. It is my understanding that that is not the bulk of the child separations that are happening. But have you seen anything to support that?
That seems to be the overwhelming majority of cases at when it comes to oh god, Immigrations and Customs doesn't do this. Is it Border Patrol or is it INS that does the overwhelming majority of these prosecutions?
I assume it would
From
be
a
Border Patrol.
prosecutorial standpoint, I think it's Border Patrol.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not ICE that's doing that.
And
So
so you're saying that you saying that the bulk of that is happening because of there's some sort of drug transportation happening?
not necessarily. I'm saying that when you have a separate criminal offense that's being tried for, that's where you have to, in that case, separate the child. You have no. I mean, if the child isn't a mule, how the hell do you try the child?
But I guess I'm saying that as it stands right now, like I said, I think that it's because it's a criminal offense across the border. That is why it's almost in every situation why they at least have the option of separating the children from their parents.
So the great image that everybody knows, when that separation happened, it was a separation for about 30 minutes to do a background check.
I mean, I'm sure that
You know that video, that footage.
Maybe there's one picture where that's true, but I mean, we know that
and that happens. That happens. By the way, that happens at the border all the time.
I mean, I recently saw a story where there are children that they don't even know who the parents were anymore. They've literally lost.
Yeah, and that's a tragedy. That's a real tragedy. And for example, a huge when parents bring kids across the border, one of the things that they do in the case of the U.S.-Mexico border, and I hate the fact that we've reduced ourselves to that, but at the U.S.-Mexican border, one of the things that has become a problem are these. Basically, you're aware that something like 90% of all females who go across Mexico to get the U.S.-Mexican border get raped along the way, right?
I'd be very interested to see that. But what was that?
That's so the lead in for that. That was a lead in for that. A lot, and I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but it's not less than 1%. It's a substantial percentage of the kids that come across the border. Those kids aren't the kids. The parents that are supposedly with them aren't those kids' parents. Now, they may be aunts and uncles or whatever, but one of the best ways to determine if they are their actual parents is to pull the kid aside in a room without the parents and say, like, you don't have to worry about them. Just tell us the truth. Are they your parents? That's one of the most effective ways of doing that. Like, have you ever seen the video where a woman does this? And the reason that they do that is to like basically quietly tell
it's a signal
somebody
to say that something's happening to them.
Yeah. And that's basically the same thing with kids. That like the kids are not likely to lie about these sorts of things if there's no risk of harm. If they perceive no risk of harm, excuse me. So that's a huge part of why you would necessarily have to separate kids.
But you're saying that the benefits of the separations outweigh the costs of separating, because I'm
right. I mean, that's a 10-minute separation. That's a 10-minute separation.
500 parents, I think. I'm still trying to find it. Were separated recently, and they deported the parents, and the kids are stuck here, and the kids are essentially just in some sort of limbo now. This is a story that I saw very recently, and that's because of the child separation policy. And you're saying okay? I mean, dismissive, honestly.
Well, I mean, why were they separated?
Why were they separate? I'm assuming that they came here. Maybe their asylum claim wasn't found legitimate, and because they were separated, that's what I'm saying.
Were they actually the parents? Were the parents committing certain other crimes? Were the parents abusing the kids? Because that seems like a very good. I'm sorry, but like the state absolutely has a role in stepping in and taking kids away from parents who are beating the hell out of their kids.
But see, that's the thing. So you think that these people were beating their children or whatever? And
no, I'm asking you if they were. Do you know
I don't think that we know that. That's what I'm saying. I had never heard before until what you just said now, that the reason that they're separated is because they were committing some other crime.
Yeah, a huge part of why you separate kids from parents at the border is to ask that question. And it happens every single time they cross the border.
But what's happening? But see, you're saying is to ask that question, but if they don't have like an actual reason to ask that, like if there's no, we're not going to just stop a parent and child walking down the street and be like, hey, pull them aside and do that.
Right, because they're not crossing the border.
Especially if there's a legitimate chance that they are going to be separated and not be reconnected.
Right,
I'm saying
because they're not crossing the border.
Because they're not crossing the border, but sure. But why? I'm saying, when someone crosses the border from California to Oregon, that doesn't.
That's very different border from the U.S.-Canada border.
And I'm saying why? Like, what data do you have to back up that this is a large number of people that's happening, and that there's some sort of assuming you're saying some sort of child trafficking, where that's happening at the rate where it makes sense to separate these families that potentially will never be reunited.
Okay, so I'm not going to tell you that it's a majority.
Well, because It's not.
Well, it may or may not be. I would imagine that most of the illegal immigrants, most of the separation of parents from kids at all through the process is, yeah, not parent is actual parents, not, you know. Unfortunately, I don't know. I don't know that I'm using the right search terms because I'm coming up with some stuff that has nothing to do with this.
And the story I'm looking at right now, this is from the New York Times, and it says the 545 children that were separated, they were just separated because they were found they'd crossed the border illegally, and it says nothing that they had been found committing some other crime. Because that would seem to be what you're saying, that they were separated because they were committing some other crime, and that's why the separation happened.
Well, again, another reason would be then the article doesn't cite any reason, does it? Does it cite any reason?
The reason was that they crossed the border illegally.
Okay. So here's a reason why if anyone crosses the border illegally, it would be wise to see if the kids that are with them are actually their kids.
But you realize that that's a lot different than what you originally said. You said that the separations are only happening when they are found committing a crime separate from crossing the border.
Okay. So in the actual criminal proceedings, yes, of course that's what's happening. But when it comes to literally at the border, what's happening in those facilities, right, where you have to bring somebody in to see, like obviously anyone who crosses the border illegally, anyone who is going to cross the border who isn't a U.S. citizen and is bringing with them kids, right? And there's a situation where there's a reasonable probability that the kids don't belong to them. A good question to ask is, are these actually your kids? I mean, do you disagree?
I mean, I don't disagree that should take 5 minutes to do that. But
there's like a 10-minute separation.
We're talking about families that are already here in the U.S. and that they've been detained because they were found out that they were crossing illegally and that they were separated after that. And that is
were the kids born here?
This is the case with these 545 children. What'd you say?
Were the kids born here?
It says the majority. No, they weren't born here. It says the majority of these kids were under the age of 5. By the way.
Okay. I'm just trying to blow through this, and so it says that none of these kids were born here.
No.
Okay, where were they arrested?
It's looking like they were within the United States.
Okay, by how much?
Why is that relevant?
Because if you came here on a plane and you landed in Hartford and you made your way to Nashville, there aren't a whole lot of Border Patrol agents there.
Okay.
So there's a huge difference in policy prescription when it comes to things like ICE, Border Patrol, and what was that third category we said? ICE, Border Patrol, and INS.
Okay.
So in the case of something like that, like what I just described, they would probably be detained by INS. In the case of 6 feet across the border, they're going to be detained by Border Patrol. There's very different questions to ask because of the existing policy when it comes to those sort of things.
But what you're saying, I feel like, is a little misleading because you're saying it's a good thing to separate them and ask, are these really your parents?
It is. How is that a bad thing?
Wait, no, but here's my problem. Is that's not all that's happening, because if that's all that was happening, it'd be super easy. The kid says, yeah, that's my dad, to reunite them. That's not what's happening. That's why these 545 children are completely, this wasn't like a 5-minute separation. They were being held in separate facilities, and they were being held where they weren't in contact. The parents got sent away and they're not here anymore. Like when you say, oh, it's just because they're asking them, like, oh, is this your dad? That's obviously not the extent of what's happening.
I'm asking that question because this article doesn't seem to answer that question. It seems like a very legitimate question to ask.
No. But you made the claim that the reason that the separation is happening to ask that question. We know that.
Listen. What I'm saying is that there are a ton in the scientific process. There are a ton of independent variables to control for here. So we should control for those independent variables before we assume that the dependent variable has been proved true.
No. But what I'm asking is your original reason for the child separation was that these kids there might be the chance of child trafficking, and you're saying, okay, well, we have to ask the kids. We know that they're not just being withheld for the 10 minutes that it takes to ask that question. We know that these children are being held.
Is that what that article says? They're not being, that's why they were being separated? Does it say why they were separated?
We both know that these separations are happening, right?
Okay.
Is that something that we both agree is happening?
Why? The fact that the separations are happening to me tells me nothing about the separation. If
In your
if I'm a 5-year-old kid here in the U.S. and my dad gets arrested and my mom's already passed away, what do you think's going to happen?
No, but I think you said that the reason that they separate them though is to ask whether or not you said
I
it was to ask
know.
that question.
I gave a specific case. I gave a very specific case. I didn't say when they are detained by INS. I didn't say when they are detained as an extension of the role of ICE. I said when they are brought before trial. Like I made that very clear when it comes to the Border Patrol that when there are these criminal investigations, it's not the criminality has nothing to do specifically with the illegality of the border crossing. When they are brought to these trials that I made clear is what I was talking about. That the mere fact that they have crossed the border is never the reason that they are being tried criminally. That's never the case. It is always the separate criminal behavior.
Not why
Now,
they're being
yes,
tried criminally, but why the children are being separated from the parents.
right, and I made it very clear what I was talking about. So I want to make that clear that I'm not saying that in this case that you're providing in the article that we're talking about now that we've moved on to this article, that's what's happening. We were talking
Okay.
about in the generic.
Okay, broadly, we know that there are these detention centers at the border where the children and the parents are being held separately, the child separation. Now, why do you think that that's a good thing, a legitimate thing? Why do you think that that's something that should be happening?
Well, in certain cases, I agree that it should happen, obviously.
But it's happening across the board.
Okay.
Do you not have a problem with that?
I mean, there are reasons to separate a parent from a kid. There are reasons not to. I disagree with the reasons not to, and I agree with the reasons too.
We can talk about the reason that Stephen Miller cited, where he cited the reason of self-deportations, where the idea is to make it so terrible at these places where these people don't want to come here, where they know that you'll be separated from your family and you'll be held in not very good conditions, and then no one will want to come here. Stephen Miller specifically said that.
So would you prescribe deporting the kids then with the parents?
No, I've made
because it sounds to me like it would be like
I made my prescription really clear that we should allow them into the country.
Just because? I mean, if you cross, no, listen, I'm sorry. If you cross the border now illegally, then no, you should go back to the country from whence you came. And then if you want to come back, go to where there's a legal border crossing and conduct that crossing legally. Now again, I can envision a world where what you're talking about would not be illegal. I can perfectly envision that. That isn't the world of today.
And I'm saying right now it should not be illegal, and we should not. And at the very least, we shouldn't enforce it. If you're saying it's illegal now, it's a law that we shouldn't enforce because we should make it legal.
Okay, so I think we're actually at our headway here because I think we've just gotten to a point where we just disagree on something very fundamental, and also we're 5 minutes to go here. So.
All right, sounds good.
So, because it sounds like this is going to naturally segue into what was the last point you just made? I just lost track already because it's going to segue into a separate topic.
Because you said we should deport the kids too. I said no, we should allow the parents and the children to stay.
Well, we moved. What was beyond that? After that,
I said that if people should be allowed to come here, that was basically my prescription at the very beginning, that people should be allowed to freely come here. I'm big on freedom, and I think that you should be able to come, move here, and pursue a better life.
Chat disconnected. Yeah, and as far as economic migrants are concerned, yes, I can conceive of a world where we have very, very, very limited control over who comes across the border. I'm absolutely with you on that respect. But I disagree with the notion that today, in our current climate, there is a real reason to institute the border policy of 1900. Which was
I think the only natural conclusion from this is to do this again sometime, Mike.
Yeah, there was a topic that you brought up that was so good that I would rather talk about, honestly.
Oh, was it? I said, I mean, if they come here, they should be allowed to stay here.
Man, I'll have to review the tape because there was something that naturally segued into. That was an entirely separate topic. That was a much more philosophical topic, which I'm more interested in, to be honest.
Frankly, I would have also enjoyed the philosophical debate.
Yeah.
Well, shoot, it's okay though. We're running low on time.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to quickly go through the chat. It doesn't seem like there were that many people there, and I don't see a whole lot of question marks. Okay. So I think D. Rice asked, Karl, from a moral point of view, should we force Australia to let me in with no questions asked? I think you've said no because you are not for forcing countries to take people.
Yeah, I
correct?
would never force. If I lived in Australia, I would be advocating for the exact same thing that I do right now. But I live in America, so that's I'm
Right, right, right.
advocating.
So,
I'm
so in the
advocating
case,
that every country adopt the border policy I'm ascribing.
right. So the policy you're prescribing wouldn't allow for people who don't want to go to a country to be forced into a country.
Yeah, of course not.
Yeah. Okay.
That would be a strange position if anyone holds that.
Welfare dependents are not dependent on working. We went over that. D. Rice, does Carl know, yes, and does Carl know why we sent money and undermined those Central American countries? Does he know why the countries had those leaders that we undermined? Soviets is the hint. Dan, I kind of actually disagree with that. If you don't mind me answering that one for you, Carl, I kind of disagree
No,
with
go
that.
for it, Mike. I think
we
we're
just,
in agreement on that one.
like, I don't think we had any business going to Guatemala. They had problems. They can figure out their problems. If they want to come to us, they can come to us. But for the most part, I think we should just stay out of other countries' business. This is
Yep, we're in
this is the
total
sovereignty
agreement.
of the state, right? Like, yeah. And I don't see any more question marks. So, folks, thanks for tuning in. I'll have to review the tape because, Carl, we're going to have another debate sometime because there was something
That
at the
sounds
very
good.
end there that sounds awesome. So, Carl, thanks for joining us. And as I mentioned before stream, just remind everybody how they can reach you.
Yeah,
How they
guys,
can
check
follow
me
you.
out on YouTube. It's just my name, Karl Emmerich, and this was a lot of fun. Hopefully, we can do it again.
All right, Carl, thanks for joining us. Everybody else who's watching at home, good night.